Well, joining me to go through those today are the Sunday Mirror's political editor Nigel Nelson and the journalist and author Ella Whelan. And I have to say, Ella, I missed this Mrs. Doubtfire comparison.
I can't really figure it out either. Not least because, I mean, Mrs. Doubtfire goes up against pompous rivals and wins. So for Guy Verhofstadt, this might not have been the most fortunate of comparisons to make if he's trying to do down.
Well, she wins
Johnson.
back her husband. Perhaps he's talking what is wife.
Her
wife. Yeah.
So I think that this really only showing, especially the cartoon showing Johnson sweeping away the competitors, isn't very favourable.
Yeah, I couldn't get the reference either. I mean, I made the assumption it was Robin Williams pretending to be something that he wasn't, and that was the comparison with Boris Johnson. But what Boris actually isn't, I'm not quite sure about. So,
well, what about, is he a slippery swimmer?
Well, I think that part's true. That cartoon was much easier to understand, and yes, he's being very slippery at the moment.
Now, Rod Liddle saying that if the Supreme Court rule against the government, it will be crippling for democracy. Ella, what do you think?
Well, I'm completely behind this point of view. I think that it's what's quite remarkable is in the last few days we've seen a kind of a real naked attempt to try and pretend like this is about parliamentary sovereignty or the Constitution, but really what you have to most of us is the vision of big business embodied by figures like Gina Miller and wealth throwing their power around in the courts through a nakedly political attempt to stop Brexit, because this isn't really about Boris Johnson anymore or the illegality or legality of it. It's about getting Parliament back to stop Brexit.
It's not really about Brexit, though. I mean, this particular case is purely about whether the suspension of Parliament... Well, I mean, Brexit is the backdrop to absolutely everything in politics now. But it's about the narrow issue...
No, carry on.
No, it is about the narrow issue of whether it's legal to suspend Parliament. At the moment, I can't see how it can't be. It was wrong to do it, but whether it is actually illegal is another matter. And also bear in mind that the Brexiteers are quite pleased when the Supreme Court ruled they should have a vote on Brexit, which effectively stopped Theresa May's Withdrawal Act.
OK, we're going to talk more in a moment. This is All Out Politics, coming up more of The View. Well, let's get more now from the opinion pages of the newspapers with my guest, the Sunday Mirror's political editor, Nigel Nelson, and the journalist and author, Ella Whelan. And Ella, we got this article in the Times by Jenny Russell. She says there's this battle going on inside Number 10, really, I suppose, ultimately for the ear of Boris Johnson.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's very true that everyone who thinks that Johnson is on this kind of very straight and narrow path towards catastrophic no deal forgets that there is this war going on between, as Jenny puts it, on the one hand, the kind of Dominic Cummings camp, which is very much for the strategic pushing everything to the limit, pushing everything to the cliff edge, taking big risks. And on the other hand, Michael Gove, who's very keen on the deal, very keen on trying to resurrect Theresa May's deal in some form and another with a few tweaks. And what she's arguing is that Boris Johnson hasn't really picked which one to go with. And I think that his, as she puts it, he seems to think that his vim and vigour is going to carry him through this. But the reality of having to make a decision on that one way or other is going to come up soon. And I think from my point of view as a Brexit voter anyway, the problem with Dominic Cummings' strategy is that while I absolutely applaud the kind of hardline Brexit stance, this is not something that you can wheedle through or you can sneak under or you can cram down people's throats. It has to be done democratically. And so she's right that Johnson's going to come a cropper at some point,
You
I think.
pick up on these divisions?
Yeah, I mean, I like this column because it actually tells you things about what's going on inside. The bit that I found interesting that I hadn't heard before is we've all been wondering about how Boris Johnson will avoid getting out of asking for an extension at the European Council on the 17th, 18th. And what Jenny Russell is suggesting is that they are thinking in terms of him refusing to do it, the Supreme Court, again, coming in and ordering someone else to. That would be his way out of his quandary. I'd have thought it doesn't really help him in the long run. His whole premiership is based on leaving on October the 31st. If he doesn't, I can't see how he survives.
I mean, my view is that he's probably is running a twin track here. It's not as much as a battle for his ear or what he really believes. He'll go for the one he thinks he can get through.
And I think that, to my disappointment and other Brexiteers' disappointment, is that he's not the guy to die on his sword for Brexit. He is not going to sacrifice his political career, as rocky as it has been so far, on pushing through the democratic demand for a no deal. I think that Johnson always has in his heart really believed that he can do this Frankenstein's monster of a Theresa May's deal in some form or another. And I think that's the road he's going for. Never mind all this panic about no deal. I would be absolutely surprised and delighted if we did manage to have a no deal and a clean break, but I don't think that's going to happen.
Well, I think as far as the deal goes, we are getting very close to the deadline yet again about getting one. I just cannot see how we can come up with a deal. And we still don't know what he's going to do about the Irish backstop properly. We've got a few vague ideas out there, but none of them that sound terribly workable.
OK, thank you both very much indeed. See you in the next hour. Well, joining me to look through those are the Sunday Mirror's political editor, Nigel Nelson, and the journalist and author, Ella Whelan. Welcome to you both again. Nigel, are you exercised? What are things coming to when they have fashion shows in the cathedral?
I think it's great. I mean, what the Church of England would call this is sort of new ways of being church. And because only half the population say that they have any kind of religion now, the idea is they've got a real recruitment problem. So if you have a church service in a pub or a supermarket, or what they quite like doing is home churches, great. And anything to get people in seems to me a good idea. When my daughter was going to a church primary school, we had to put in serious pew time at church as part of the conditions for getting her in. I got interested in the church through that process and still go to church now. So any new ideas to get people in, just to make them think about it, great.
I mean, as a failed Catholic, I have a certain view on this. I don't think my granny would put up with this in her little church in Ireland. But I think the interesting thing is that it isn't working. More and more people are turning away from religion. And actually, I think there's an argument to be had for the church becoming more serious, more principled, and this is coming from an atheist now, and staying true to its roots of religion. And perhaps that is what people are looking for. Perhaps that, rather than relativizing everything and becoming a bit like a youth group rather than an actual place of worship, it seems to be turning people off. I mean, he also mentions things about the fact that the Church of England is getting seriously involved in politics in relation to Brexit. I think that might not wash with many Anglican voters who, as he points out, are pro-leave.
But, I mean, cathedrals and churches, they are obviously that they have a primary purpose of worshipping the Christian God, but they're also gathering places, and they've always been used as gathering
They're
places.
part of the community. Going back to medieval times, the church was your centre of the community in the same way the village pub is now, for instance. So I can't see any reason why you can't actually make it, again, a kind of community centre.
Now, we got David Davis writing in the Telegraph. Now, he's a person who, when he's not talking about Brexit, is very concerned about personal liberties and protecting people. But on this case, he's actually saying data about people's NHS treatment should be made available to private companies.
Well, this is interesting. It's a debate that's ongoing, and he's specifically looking at a recent case in which a drug that supposedly prevents or mitigates the effects of Parkinson's can be used. And the way that the researchers found out about that was by using a bank of data from people with private health insurance. But so he's arguing that we should make the NHS data accessible so that people can do these, as he calls them, virtual tests, in which you compare people's data. And on the one hand, it's incredibly attractive, the idea that you could prevent things like, terrible things like Parkinson's and make new breakthroughs in science by using data seems like a wonderful idea. On the other hand, what he sort of, I think, plays down is the fact that both people will be both very concerned about their private data being made available, and also the fact that the NHS in itself is deeply politicised at the moment with the kind of overreach, from my point of view, of public health and things like that. So once you open the door to these things being not the kind of solidly private realm that they are now, anything could happen. And so it's that weighing up of, I think we should lessen restrictions and open up space for scientific innovation.
I mean, I suppose it raises the basic question of who owns the data.
Well, that's right. And in a sense, I would have thought that we do. I mean, it's our data. And David Davis...
But if the NHS is treating you, isn't it their data as well?
Well, I mean, it's their data to look at, but I would have thought that the data actually belongs to us. What I would like to see, which I'm surprised David Davis doesn't mention, is if you were to go down this route, why the NHS shouldn't charge for it. You'd actually get an awful lot of money for that sort of database sharing, and that could actually help the NHS.
Charge you what?
Charging the drug companies. If the drug companies are using... If you were to agree to something like this, if the drug companies are using NHS data for their research, and they're out there to make a profit, those profits should be shared with the NHS.
But equally, we all want the best treatment that's going to work on us. So collaborating with the drug companies, isn't that sensible without putting a price
I'm not too
barrier
fussed about this.
I'd be more cautious, but I think that it's an interesting discussion because it opens up the concept of what the NHS is anymore. I think it should move to what we should reimagine it as what it originally was supposed to be, which is a social health project in which you would have, he mentions the 100,000 Genome Project, which is an interesting thing, which is looking at using the science of the collective in order to help individuals. And I think that something like that, moving towards a system which would do something like that, wouldn't be a bad thing.
And we got Mahsa Rui writing about the attacks on the oil facilities in Saudi Arabia. And Mahsa Rui is worried that there could be a further escalation.
Yes, and I think that one of the key points that she makes is that the great danger of both sides misreading the other's intentions. So what she's saying is that if Iran is behind this, they are making a calculation that Donald Trump won't act because there is no appetite amongst American voters for another Middle East war, and he's got an election coming up next year. Now, if that is a misreading, Iran could be in some difficulty, and obviously we know that Donald Trump is a bit volatile, and already his messages from this have been rather mixed and vague.
Yeah, I think the problem, the fearful thing in relation to this is the ambiguity, not just because, as she points out, that this, with the 2020 election coming, Donald Trump is balancing between having this sort of deep-set hatred for Iran that can sometimes border on the irrational, and also knowing that voters don't want to go for it. But I think the real ambiguity, that one that I think needs to be drawn out more, is the fact that the US and the West are condemning one intolerant, nepotistic theocracy and cozying up to another in the form of Saudi Arabia. So you've got this incredible mess, and it looks like it's escalating, but what can you do other than try and get them to realise that further Western intervention in these kind of regions is just ludicrous?
There is an irony in this situation, isn't there? That as Donald Trump's been depicted as a bullying braggart and all the rest of it, yet he seems to be someone who actually is rather averse to getting involved in conflict.
Yeah, I mean, that was certainly the impression that when he was interviewed last night, the impression seemed to be, no, he's not talking about military action. What comes out of this particular piece is Emmanuel Macron's idea that we extend some $15 billion worth of credit to Iran and see if both sides can then save face through that. Face saving is obviously the best way of actually avoiding war.
Okay, thank you both very much. It's very nice to see you.